world of cable news screaming and social media echo chambers, it's easy to lose the signal in the noise. Every day, policy is debated, votes are cast, and your tax dollars are spent. We cut through the headlines to bring you the critical context you need, focusing on what's really going on in news and politics. Welcome to the Analytical Iowan Podcast. This is your daily dose of fact-driven politics. Let's analyze today's news. Here's Eric.
And we are back here on the Analytical Iowan Podcast. It is Sunday, January 11th, as I'm recording this. Now recording it once again later in the day than I would like to. Hopefully I still get it up yet today. Otherwise, it may go up in the morning hours of Monday, barring any technical problems. And if there is some problems with the upload, it may end up having to be up later Monday. And then I'm going to record Monday's podcast probably still later than I would like, but it's also going to hopefully be up tomorrow. So you may get a double podcast, if you will. We got a lot to talk about because there's always a lot to talk about with this administration. And there's so much going on that this administration is doing. They have no respect or care for the rule of law. And I want to start with this ICE shooting in Minneapolis. More and more has come out with this ICE shooting, and we've been talking about it. From all accounts, it looks like Renee Good, who was shot, was in a perfectly good mood, smiling, talking to him, not mad at him, just wanted to leave because that was where her home is. And she was trying to leave. And somehow in the process, one of the ICE agents got jumpy the way it looks. He was recording with his phone and didn't seem like there was a problem until she started to pull away. He moves the phone to the other hand, pulls his gun, and shoots her in the face. And MAGA's having a hard time with this one. They really are. And we've talked about it on other episodes of the podcast as well. They're having problems because she doesn't fit the narrative, right? She's not an immigrant. She's not a minority. She was a white woman, a mother with kids. And yet they want to come out and say she's a criminal. Now, I've been seeing some things online, and of course, AI is not helping. There is a supposed mugshot floating around, yet it's easily debunked as AI because, in part, it gets her birthday wrong, which isn't the biggest deal. And then there's the shirt she is wearing for that mugshot happened to be the same one from the widely publicized photo of her from the day it happened. Somebody put it into AI, asked AI to generate an image, and it did. And this is the problem we're living in. Now, MAGA would tell you, well, she was a criminal. She should just comply, and she gets what she deserved. Except here's the problem. She wasn't. And they can't justify that. But also, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter if she had one conviction for anything, 34 felony convictions, or any number in between. If she was charged with 300 crimes, does not matter. The act in question, with where she was, with what happened right then in that moment, did not warrant her being shot. And this whole thing reeks of a cover-up. And as always, when it comes to everything this administration does, the cover-up is going to be worse than just admitting what happened. And more keeps coming out, right? We've got multiple angles. It's fairly obvious this was not a good shoot. Now, Minnesota is looking to launch their own criminal investigation. And I, by no means, am a law expert, but I've seen some law creators talking about how this would go about and what they would probably have to do. And one lawyer that I really trust, I like his content because he delivered it very unbiased. He said point blank, he was not taking sides, but he said if they wanted to go about charging him, what would happen is they would have to file state level charges. Remember, Donald Trump cannot pardon state level offenses. So, state of Minnesota would have to file charges against the shooter. And then, more than likely, there would be a successful petition to a federal court to have the case heard in federal court. But don't jump the gun there. Donald Trump cannot pardon state crimes. This is still a state offense. The problem is why it would be a federal matter is because ICE agents and other federal law enforcement, and I know ICE is not entirely law enforcement. They don't have the same rights as, say, the FBI or state police or local police. They are supposed to strictly be dealing with immigration. However, uh, with them being a federal officer, they are allowed a certain level of qualified immunity. And with the supremacy clause, they would have to argue that the state right supersedes the federal government, or that the federal government's claim for immunity doesn't qualify here because of other issues. Now, whether that would be a murder charge, maybe second or third degree, I don't know if you could get premeditated first degree in there, even though he moved his phone and drew his weapon before she moved the vehicle. That would be a stretch. But once it gets to federal court, they would have to prove immunity doesn't apply. And assuming immunity doesn't apply, they would still hear the case in federal court. They would, but they would be a federal judge ruling based on Minnesota law. It would still be the same state state level charge, and it would still be something Donald Trump could not pardon for. It would just be dealt with in a federal courthouse under federal jurisdiction because of the fact he is a federal officer. So that was something I was very interested to learn. Now, that is way down the road. First, we have to get Minnesota through the investigation phase to where they come out and charge. And they can't jump the gun because of speedy trial rules. They need to have all their ducks in a row and make sure that they have a good, solid case. Now, people are going to want justice and want justice quickly. And unfortunately, the criminal justice system moves very, very slowly. So they're going to be dealing with that for a while. And the problem is the federal government is not complying here. They're not working in a joint manner. Normally, what would happen is the FBI and local law enforcement would work together. They would dig into it. They would get to a mutually acceptable outcome. They would work through all the evidence, and if they decided that a case was warranted, they would have it. But the FBI in this case is not complying. Neither is ICE. They're not turning over anything to the local law enforcement. And as I think I talked about on yesterday's podcast, I saw a TikTok video, and I don't know if it is accurate. It was taken from a vehicle that was driving down the interstate, and you could see what appeared to be Renee Good's vehicle with bullet holes in it being towed, windows down, no tarp, nothing to preserve the crime scene. And it implied, at least, that if this was all accurate, that the FBI is doing whatever it can in order to, contaminate that so the evidence is no good, right? They want to bring in reasonable doubt because if he is found not guilty, which not guilty is not the same thing as innocent, it just means that the prosecution did not meet their burden of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, which means that the defense is able to put in some kind of suspicion. And if they've tainted the evidence, well, that could cause suspicion. And it could lead to something. Now, This is going to be a long time going, and it is not going to be the easiest of cases for the state of Minnesota to bring. Um, but this is just going to be the first, if they do bring charges, this is going to be the first of many against federal ICE agents. Now, they're going to be getting charged, maybe not now, but down the road. We're seeing all kinds of footage and video of ICE, how they're reacting. They're shoving people into traffic. I saw one video of what appeared to be an unmarked ICE vehicle chasing somebody on foot who was trying to flee and has his back to the vehicle, and they ram him with the truck, which again is unjustifiable force because the guy was running away. He posed no risk unless they could prove he somehow had something on him that made him a risk, like he was going to somehow blow them up or something, which it didn't appear from anything from the video I saw that was anywhere remotely the case. Did not see a weapon or anything. Hitting somebody with your vehicle is considered lethal force, and you are trying to take down an unarmed or apparently unarmed suspect who is not firing shots, not doing anything, and you ram them with your vehicle. That is not okay. And part of the reason these ICE officers are doing whatever they want is A, because they feel like they have the right. They are very well protected behind that badge, or at least they think they are. And a lot of them are the groups that used to be known as the Proud Boys, the Oath Keepers, the Three Percenters, um, Patriot Front, those other paramilitary groups that have all but disappeared right now. That's because Donald Trump has, well, indirectly, Donald Trump has recruited them into his administration effectively as makeshift ICE agents. They're getting the so-called respect and authority they've always wanted, and they don't care about the rules. They think they're protected, so they can do whatever they want. Somebody said about Renee Good, she wasn't shot because the officer was afraid. She was shot because she wasn't afraid. And that kind of fits here. ICE wants everybody afraid. Donald Trump and his administration wants people terrified of him. He wants to rule with an iron fist. Problem is, he's got nobody but incompetence around him. Now, when it's all said and done, and Donald Trump is gone because he will be gone, there is going to come a point when he is no longer in office. Whether that's Republicans saying enough is enough and impeaching and removing Donald Trump between now and 2029, whether that is J.D. Vance going to Congress and saying, yeah, this guy's mentally gone, his dementia is too far, we have to remove him, and getting Congress to remove him with the 25th Amendment, whether that's the Democrats getting control of the House and the Senate in the midterms and impeaching and removing him, or whether that is just a Big Mac running its course because the guy is not healthy. I heard somewhere that, and this was in an interview, I just don't remember if I'm getting the exact order right. It is something like 2 Big Macs, a fillet of fish, and 2 large fries every time he goes to McDonald's. It might be the other way around. It might be 1 Big Mac and 2 fish, but either way, it's a lot of food. And this is coming from somebody who loves food, going, that's a lot. So Donald Trump is eventually going to be gone. And when the Republicans are no longer in charge, they're no longer protecting ICE agents and everybody around him. We need an attorney general, somebody not like Merrick Garland. I thought Merrick Garland was going to do a much better job than what he actually did. And we need an attack dog, somebody who is going to go after everybody in this administration and charge everybody. For example, this ICE agent, whose name I can't think of, but it doesn't matter. This ICE agent, there's no statute of limitations for a murder charge. There's not. And so he may skate for now if they don't file state charges. He may skate for a couple of years. However, he's ultimately going to be charged, I believe, on a federal level, and a lot of them are. Now, we are also hearing that their normal training period, which is only 18 weeks, which is not a lot of time. There are a lot of professions that have longer training periods to be qualified to be considered hireable or to be functioning in your role um, before you get that level of promotion. And yet 18 weeks is what they go with to promote ICE agents. And that's a little over 4 months. That's it. 4 months of training. And now you're an ICE agent. However, they said that was too far. That's too much training. And they cut it back to 47 days. Why? Because Donald Trump is the 47th president. That's the level of incompetence we are dealing with here. They are losing their ever loving minds with the stupid bullshit they are doing. We are not dealing with, for the most part, smart, sane people. All right, moving on past that, I want to talk about something from yesterday's podcast. I think I touched on it the day before, too. Donald Trump comes out with this plan where he's talking about um, capping credit card interest at 10% for 1 year. And I did a video, and I talked about it on the podcast, but I did a video talking about it where I said it's a drop in the bucket to what we really need. And I'm right. Uh, Not because I have this huge ego and say I can't be wrong, but look around. 10% on credit card interest is not that big of a deal. I mean, it'll help some people, but when you're talking about rent in some cases being, uh, well over what people are even able to make, we're talking even around here, a lot of 1 to 2 bedrooms. We're talking anywhere from $800 to $1,000 in my area. Where just a couple of years ago, you could get a 3 bedroom. Before I bought the place I'm living now, I was renting a 3 bedroom place for barely $800 a month. That place now is renting for, I think, 12. Um, and I could be slightly off, but I'm pretty sure that's about where they are. And that wasn't even in, like, it was a good neighborhood. It was uh, a decent shape of as far as a building goes and things like that. But the landlords did things on the cheap because they built, things for, they had rows and rows of these duplexes that you could rent, and it was nothing but baseboard heaters and one wall unit AC, and that was your heating and cooling. Um, and it was ridiculously expensive. I was paying on a monthly basis to keep that place comfortable, uh, over $300 a month. By contrast, I have central heat and air in a place that is comparable in square footage. Uh, Actually, maybe even a little bigger when you add in the fact it's got a basement. Um, and I'm getting, $100, 100 to 120 a month. It was so energy inefficient, but that's what I could afford, and that's where I chose to live. And it was a relatively nice place, but now they're ridiculously high. Rent's high, groceries are high. And I was talking about how it would help to drop the tariffs and things like that. And I had MAGAs coming into my comment section of that video saying things like, well, it's better than what we had under Biden. Biden, we had 9% inflation. Well, first of all, that 9% inflation happened because Donald Trump mishandled COVID, completely and totally mishandled COVID. If he would have handled COVID the way it should have been handled, we would have come out of it in about 4 weeks. Inflation never would have spiked. And if people wouldn't have freaked out, inflation wouldn't have spiked. But because Donald Trump was so piss poor at doing anything to handle the pandemic, and we lost 1 million people, and then we come out of it pretty much not quite after Joe Biden gets in office, but he gets in office and he starts handling things correctly. And suddenly we're getting out of COVID and we're making progress because we come out of it on the other side. Donald Trump, the effects led into Biden's presidency, and Biden took all the blame. but 9% inflation was high. But by the time the election happened, we had it down under 3. But MAGA likes to forget that fact that, yeah, it peaked, but then Joe Biden and his administration had done things to fix it. But that doesn't matter to MAGA, okay? But they're talking about how, oh, it was Joe Biden's fault inflation was so bad. And it's something, it'll help them, it'll save them money. Okay, well, the cap of 10% on interest rates only matters for those people who have a credit card and that have higher than a 10% interest rate and that carry a balance month to month. Now, that's a lot of people, don't get me wrong, but that doesn't fix everything for everybody. I know a lot of people who do not have credit cards at all. They don't have one. Don't see the need, or they know themselves well enough. I've got one friend who straight up says, he goes, my credit's good enough for a credit card. He goes, and I've had them off and on over the years. But the reason he doesn't carry a credit card or doesn't have one is because he knows what happens whenever he gets one. Is that there's going to come a point, there's going to be something he wants that he can't afford. And instead of budgeting and waiting for it and getting it later, he's going to decide that now is the time to go buy it because he can put it on the card and he'll deal with it later. And so what I'm getting at though is with this guy, he says he doesn't carry a credit card, doesn't have one anymore because he knows how he would react. So capping 10% credit card interest doesn't do anything to help him. But you know what would have helped him? The Biden era restriction that he put on all banks and all financial institutions that capped all fees at $8. At $8. Now, I remember what it was like before the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. And that came about after 2008, where they started putting in some rules as far as how banks had to deal with uh, transactions and how banks had to deal with fees and trying to make things better for everybody. Okay. And one of the things I remember from my youth, and I was rather, I was an adult, but still rather green, spending money I probably shouldn't have been. And I got myself into a little bit of trouble multiple times. And before the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, I remember the bank I was with at the time, I overspent by a lot. And I had something big come out. Don't remember what the bill was for, but I also had like 5 or 6 small things come out. And what the bank did was what they could have done was paid all of the small things. I had enough money for all of the small things. And like the small things combined were $50, if I remember right, something like that combined. And the big thing was a couple hundred or whatever. But I didn't have enough money in the account in the moment for it to clear. And they didn't really give you any leeway at the time. At least that bank didn't. So what they did is said, well, okay, you don't have enough money for all of it. Well, they claimed the big one hit first, the big payment, and the rest were all after. So it was like 5 transactions, but they hit me with a $34.99 fee for each and every one. Suddenly, I didn't have the big payment already of 200 and some bucks, but they hit me with $150 worth of fees. And it was my own fault for not for overspending. It was a mistake you learn when you're young. And turns around, didn't make that mistake ever again. I started watching what I was spending, trying to make sure I knew that when things were going to hit, etc. So I didn't do that. But if you would have capped all those fees at $8, that might have been reasonable. Why did they need $34.99 or 20? I think it was $34.99 a piece at the time. Doesn't matter. Point is, they charged ridiculous fees, and then because they sent all those payments back and they charged me fees, well, Then they started charging me fees every so many days until I brought my account current and I had money in there. And they were charging me fees on top of fees. And those things all changed with the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. But capping them at $8 was Biden's idea in 2024. That was something they decided was going to save a lot of people billions of dollars. One of the first things Donald Trump did in his presidency was get rid of those fees or get rid of that cap and let banks go back to charging whatever they wanted. Why? Because banks pay Donald Trump, and well, guess what? And they donate to his campaign and stuff. And he figures if he makes it easier on banks, well, they're going to be nicer to him when he needs a favor and he needs money. That's not out to help anybody. And cutting interest rates to 10% only helps a fraction of people. There are so many other things this administration could do, like finally backing off the tariffs. But they're not doing any of that. The other thing this commenter said, and it wasn't the only commenter, was talking about how the left's only idea is taxing the rich. And what they don't understand about taxing the wealthy and taxing the rich is this period of time when they want to talk about how great everything was. And if you ask them to define a time when they're talking about making America great again, most of them are talking about the period from post World War II to about pre Ronald Reagan, maybe pre Jimmy Carter, late 40s through the 70s or so, where everything was good. Well, at least it was if you weren't a minority. But that's a discussion for another day. No, what they're talking about is where you could go to work, get a job, support a family on one income, and come out with a house, a car, support 3 or 4 people total. If you were a man, be married, have kids. If you were a woman, you didn't have to go to work. Um, and the economy was great. What they failed to remember is that was when we were taxing the wealthy in the 90 percentiles. Why were we taxing the wealthy at 90%? Well, because it spurred economic growth. And it wasn't through wealth distribution by saying, okay, well, the government's going to take all this and line their pockets with it. What happened was you would find reasons for these big companies and these wealthy people to reinvest. They would turn around and say, okay, I've got all of this going. I'm going to turn around and I'm going to I'm going to open up a second line in my factory. I'm going to open another uh, store in the town over. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. They were investing money back in instead of taking it as profit. What happens when you give people who have more than enough money that uh, you know they could never spend it all, even more money? It sits in a bank account, or they buy something they don't need, right? And I'm not against wealthy people having money. Let's There's a TikTok creator and a YouTube creator, Tom Powell Jr. You may know him. And he talks about regulated capitalism. And basically, he says, and I kind of agree with this take, that if you want to make money in a capitalist system, everybody underneath you in your business should be taken care of, and then you can make as much money as you want. What does he mean by that? Well, effectively, what he means is if you're a big multi-billion-dollar multinational company like the largest retailer in the world, uh, Walmart, for example, Walmart has some of the highest rates of employee dependability on government assistance. Employee dependability. They're getting paid to work for Walmart, but they're not getting paid enough that they don't still qualify for food stamps and other government assistance, and they need that to survive. But yet they make some of the biggest money in the world as a company. They should not be able to keep making that kind of money if their employees are not taken care of. Now, if their employees were all sitting living comfortably and none of them needed assistance. And I know there's always going to be a few that need assistance for whatever reason, whether they're on disability and they can only work so many hours, etc., whatever. But the majority of their employees should not be on assistance. And that's the problem here. When we talk about taxing the wealthy, we are talking about putting in systems so that the wealthy are encouraged to turn around and improve the lives of Americans, improve the lives of the people working for them, and spur growth. The other thing we need to do beyond just taxing the wealthy, and I didn't get into this in the TikTok video I made about it, but we need to close some of these loopholes. And one of the loopholes that a lot of these very wealthy people use is they use the capital gains. Now, they get other things in lieu of actual money when they are running a company. For example, I'm going to pick on Elon Musk. Okay. Now, he got, as part of his bonus compensation for owning Tesla and being the CEO of Tesla, he gets stock options for Tesla. Okay. And instead of giving him as much money, they give him stock. Now, as long as he owns the stock for a year and a day because of capital gains rules, he does not have to pay income taxes on whatever he made. He doesn't pay taxes on it. So he gets to get the stock, usually for free, keep it for a year and a day, and turn around and walk away. If he sells it all, well, then he gets all that money free and clear. No big deal. But beyond that, what else does he do with it? Well, a lot of them, they take that stock, put it in a portfolio, put it in an account, and then they go to a bank and say, "Hey, Mr. Banker, see, I've got $10 million worth of stock in Tesla. You know, what can you give me for a loan on it?" And maybe they get 5 million in a loan. And I'm making the numbers are probably actually much higher than that. But they get these big dollar loans on the stock. And then the stock portfolio is used as collateral for the loan. Well, you don't get charged income tax on a loan. So then the next year comes around, they get more stock, they turn around, they pay off the first loan, or they make another investment that pays off and pays a dividend or something that they don't have to claim. And then they turn around and pay off the loan. And then that's how they're getting around all of this. We need to close some of those loopholes and start taxing the wealthy on uh, everything that's going on and making it so they start paying their fair share. When people like Donald Trump come out and say, when he was caught having not paid federal income tax for multiple years because he didn't owe any tax because his businesses had either lost money or he found loopholes to avoid paying his taxes. He goes, "Well, that just makes me smart. I'm just a smart businessman. You can't be mad at me for being smart." That's a problem, right? Donald Trump and people like him pay less federal income tax than most average Americans, and that is a major problem we have to contend with. Okay, now, um, now Donald Trump took to Truth Social yesterday or last night, I think, maybe the early morning hours this morning, somewhere in there, not entirely sure where, and said basically he may end up vetoing the Affordable Care Act subsidies should they make it to his desk. Why? Well, main reason is because it's Obamacare. And he's irritated and mad that Obama has something that is actually successful and popular. And he's jealous of that. He's jealous of the popularity of Barack Obama and Obamacare, and he wants it to fail. Now, they don't have a plan to replace Obamacare, to replace the Affordable Care Act. They just don't. So, what are they going to do? Well, I don't know. And I still think you can get Donald Trump to sign it. And there's a couple of ways I think you could get him to sign it. Now I had a MAGA in my comment say, "Well, tell them that children are gonna lose their insurance, and oh, he'll care. He'll care because children are getting hurt." And no, no, he won't. I'll get to that in a minute. Um, but here's how I think you could get him to sign it. One, tell him, "Hey, Donnie, we need like some time to get your plan through. We want to make sure your plan works. Um, so if you sign off on this extension, that'll buy us the time we need to make sure your plan doesn't fail and you don't look like a loser." That would be one way. Or you tell him that he would look like the hero for saving it and that everybody would love him. That's another way. Or you tell him, you put a little rider in the bill and say, "Hey, we're going to call it Trump Care from now on instead of the Affordable Care Act." Donald Trump may be all willing to save it if it means it gets named after him because he thinks he would get credit for its success going back to the beginning of when they called it Obamacare because, well, everybody would start calling it Trump Care, and oh man, I'd be so loved, and oh, that would really stick it to Barack Obama. That's how petty Donald Trump is. But let's go back to that. Um, well, I'll get there in a second. As far as saving the ACA, what are they going to do? I don't know. They already passed it in the House for a 3-year extension. The Senate needs to take it up. They've already vetoed, or not vetoed, they've already rejected um, plans for something very similar out of the Senate. So I don't know if this is going to pass or not. But as public outcry is getting higher, and we are coming up very close to that January 15th date where they think it is the absolute cutoff for when they can pass it without affecting people's health care too much. There may be enough pressure in the Senate to actually get them to vote on it. Now, the 15th would be what? Thursday, I think. So we'll have to see if they pass it by Thursday. And they might. I still think ultimately it's going to end up being a 2-year extension. Why? Well, because that just makes sense. 3 years puts them into having to answer questions about it in the general election, and I don't know if they want to do that. Having it end this year means they have to answer it in this year's election. Same with letting it expire, and they don't want to do that. They don't want to deal with any of that. And then voting on it and letting it go 2 years seems to be about the right extension. So I still think that may be where they settle. But now that the 3 years has passed the House, maybe that is ultimately where it ends up. Now, what could happen is the Senate could take this bill up. They could put a change in there and they could amend it to say 2 years instead of 3 and send it back to the House. Now, I don't know if everybody who voted for it the first time would still vote for it. There's never a promise or a guarantee that they would vote for a change if it meant fewer years, but you would think that they would. Now, let's get on to that comment that the MAGA left in my comment section about Donald Trump and caring if children get hurt. Donald Trump has never cared if children got hurt. Remember his first term when it came to putting migrants in cages. There are families who were separated from Donald Trump's first term when ICE and immigration and things like that came in. They separated parents from children without a plan to reunite them later, and they were never reunited. They're doing the same thing now. And if he really cared about children, he wouldn't have said that it is okay for ICE to go into churches and schools and daycare centers to go after children. And what they want to do is they want to go into these places, pick up the kids that they think or suspect of being children of immigrants or who may actually be immigrants if they came over with their parents, and say, "Yeah, we're going to take you," and then hope the school calls the parents and the parents turn themselves uh, in order to get caught, right? It's a hostage situation, effectively. And before the Trump administration, the rule that the federal government played by. It wasn't a law, but it was kind of a norm. And that was set was those places were excluded. But again, Donald Trump doesn't care about rules or norms or practicality. He's doing whatever he wants. So to say Donald Trump actually cares if children get hurt is laughable at best. Now, beyond that, you also have the Epstein files. And that's what I think a lot of these things going on are major distractions from. And more is going to keep coming out with the Epstein files. And Donald Trump is terrified of anything that comes out related to Epstein. He doesn't want us to know that he was connected, that he knew Epstein, that they were friends, any of it, right? They don't. He doesn't want us to know any of that. Yet we do, and he's trying to distract away from it. And the fact that he is in the files where he has been accused by multiple people of doing things that have harmed children, because despite one of the MAGA talking points, where they try to say that, well, the 13 to 17-year-old girls knew what they were doing, they could have said no. It doesn't change the fact that he was in his 40s at the time, and he was potentially having interactions with underage girls. Don't forget, we're also not talking about the thing that came out from the Epstein files involving Lake Michigan, where it sounds like Donald Trump was there was a tip called in saying that Donald Trump had been with a 13-year-old that he had been introduced to through her uncle, that she had been impregnated by Donald Trump at 13, gave birth to a baby alive, and that the uncle and Donald Trump went out on a boat, and we find out that Donald Trump had a riverboat casino on Lake Michigan, and they disposed of the baby in Lake Michigan. Now, that's alleged. It was a tip that was called in, but we're not talking about it in the media right now. We're talking about everything else that's going on. And for at least the moment, Donald Trump has successfully turned our attention away from the Epstein files. Now, when it comes down to it, the Epstein files are going to come out, and Donald Trump is going to be embarrassed by everything that comes out. And that could end up being the bridge where Republicans say enough is enough, and they decide to walk away from Donald Trump. Now, we've got this thing going on in Venezuela where Donald Trump goes in, they capture the president, Maduro, bring him to the United States to face trial. And he had the opportunity. They were going to install a new leader. Now, they didn't fully change the regime. They installed, or allowed to be installed, Delcy Rodriguez, the vice president under Maduro. Okay. Except the evidence pretty much shows that Maria Machado, was the one who won the 2024 election by like a 2-to-1 margin. But the ruling council that oversaw the election voted that Maduro won, and that's who became president. Now, Donald Trump had basically said, and people inside his administration are saying, that one of the reasons why Machado was not put in as the president after they got rid of Maduro was because she refused to turn over or to, deny accepting the Nobel Peace Prize in favor of Donald Trump. That she should have stepped aside and allowed Donald Trump to just have it. And so because of it, Donald Trump is butthurt, and, he decided he wasn't going to put her in charge. So instead of actually making a legitimate regime change because Donald Trump's feelings were hurt, they turn around and they say, we're putting in the vice president under Maduro, this guy who was so awful that we had to go in and get rid of him. We're just going to make him, or make her, the VP, now the president. Doesn't make a lick of sense. But see, Machado came out and said she would be more than happy to share the Nobel Peace Prize with Donald Trump. And that's not how that works. And even the Nobel Committee came out and said that's not how that works, that the decision stands for all time. You want once accepted, you can't trade it, you can't give it away, you can't reject it. Once you are awarded it, it is yours. They are not they wouldn't have a do-over. Despite Donald Trump's insistence he deserves one and that they should relook at it and do it again. Ironic part is when it comes to the Nobel Peace Prize, there are multiple there's a deadline coming up here, and multiple people have suggested Donald Trump should get one, and I don't think he will. I don't think they would give it to him. But the deadline for nominations for this year's Nobel Peace Prize is coming up. And how can Donald Trump think he is even remotely qualified to get one when we are staring at him starting a war in Venezuela, or at least an armed conflict where he went down and captured their president and is now deciding who's in charge. Now, Donald Trump took to Truth Social and that he made a post where he claims he is the acting president of Venezuela. Now, I don't know if Donald Trump is joking or not because he does not have a sense of humor. He really doesn't. You know, he got mad at Barack Obama for roasting him the one time. He cannot take a joke. I've never seen him actually tell a funny joke. Everything he says that is supposedly a joke is usually just cruel. And when we call him out for being cruel, his supporters come out and go, "But he was joking. Take a joke. He's funny." Because they don't want to believe he's doing the harmful things he is actually doing. Now, of course, what Donald Trump doesn't realize is by saying he's the acting president of Venezuela, that is setting up a dangerous precedent. He's trying to say that we now run and control Venezuela. And of course, that should not be the case. And they're saying, or he's trying to say, that he gets all deciding power, which again is not how that works. There is a president in Venezuela. Donald Trump thinks he gets to just tell this president, Delcy Rodriguez, how it all goes, and that's not going to be the case. But see, he's not used to, and he's never been used to the idea of being told no. It doesn't happen in Donald Trump's world. It just doesn't. He doesn't get told no, and we have to deal with the fallout from that. It's just in poor taste. It is a dumb idea. And I think Congress should be taking notice that this is not a joke. This is how he views himself. And I hope that the Republicans in Congress are actually considering uh, where to go from here. Now, Donald Trump has been ramping up the rhetoric on Greenland. And of course, he has been telling the Pentagon he wants strategies for how to go about taking Greenland. And what have they told him? They told him no. Why? Well, because it's not our job. First of all, they said it's an illegal order. We can't invade an ally country. But Donald Trump doesn't care about alliances at all. He should, but he doesn't. And he wants Greenland so badly. I think in part because when you look at the Mercator projection of the map, which is not an accurate depiction of how big the scale of the world is, because a lot of times it has the United States covering a big chunk and covering actually the halfway point of the world as far as where the map is. It'll show the equator in the right spot, but if you look at it, it's not actually at 50% of the map. And he looks and sees how big Greenland is, and it looks like this big giant landmass, so he wants it. He wants to be known as the guy who added all of that territory to the United States. And then, of course, you add in the rare earth minerals. That would take probably a decade or two for us to set up all of the infrastructure needed to go in and actually successfully mine them, get them out, and refine them and setting all of it up. it's not a great plan. But see, Donald Trump only cares about his legacy. But he's talking about what would happen about going into Greenland, and NATO has effectively said, and Denmark has said, if we invade militarily into Greenland, they're going to invoke Article 5, and the rest of NATO has said we will back uh, Greenland because they are part of Denmark. Now, that would be horrible. That would lead us potentially into a world conflict, a world war. Beyond that, it could be even more problematic for America. Why? Because Donald Trump doesn't understand how world politics work. He never has. He has always relied on people telling him in the way a fifth grader would understand it, because that's about his intelligence level. But he has relied on other people to tell him exactly how to deal with everything. So if we invade Greenland, it would have more problems than just military, right? Than just militarily, about NATO coming to Denmark's defense. There's also the fact that a lot of our allies own a lot of U.S. debt. When we need to borrow money, we go to other countries to borrow money. That's how that works. And they lend us money, we pay them interest. What happens when all of those markers are called due? When all of those loans are said, hey, pay now. We've been happy just collecting the interest for years, but pay up. We don't have the funds. We would have to find somebody willing to borrow us the funds to pay all of that back. And I don't know where we would get that kind of money. Again, we've let our debt get out of control, but because Republicans won't let us tax the wealthy and actually start getting us into a surplus and paying it down, despite the claim that that's what they want to do, they like to give more and more tax cuts to the wealthy. We would be in trouble if they called home all the markers, called home all the loans and said, pay up now. Then there's the other problem. We have thousands, I believe. I know it's at least hundreds, but maybe even thousands of bases. It's hundreds of bases in Europe. Hundreds of bases. Okay. What happens when our allies say no more? And they say, yeah, you're no longer welcome. We're revoking your lease. Get off our soil. Sure, we already have a foothold in those countries if we wanted to do something militarily. But what's going to happen? But could we really go up on that many fronts against that many places? Is Donald Trump really willing to risk it? What happens when all of the European countries say, get the fuck out? And we're no longer allowed to have bases in their country because Donald Trump is trying to make a claim for Greenland. Now, he made a couple points about Greenland and he doesn't even realize how he fucked up. Okay. Denmark has had a claim to the island of Greenland since before we were ever colonized. Okay. Period. They've had a claim for like 500 to 600 years minimum. We've only been around like 4 top end. And we've only been a country for 250 this year, at least where we were recognized as an independent country. So Denmark has an absolute claim, but he comes out and says, well, just because you landed a boat there does not give you claim to that land. Well, if that's the case, that means we don't have a claim to any of the United States. There were people here. They all had their own territories. We call them Native Americans. Donald Trump would call them Indians, or probably something worse. So by Donald Trump's own logic, we should also be all forced to leave and go back to Europe or wherever, basically. This is the problem with Donald Trump. He thinks he's doing something and he fucks up every single time. Beyond that, he keeps talking about how he doesn't want, uh, he thinks Russia and China are going to make a play for Greenland and he doesn't want them that close. Yet they have made no indication that they are going to do anything of the sort. But he talks about how he doesn't want Russia to be that close. Well, mainland Russia and mainland Alaska are like 50 miles apart. But it gets even worse. There's an island out on the Alaskan archipelago, the little tail on Alaska. And I can't remember the name of the island, but there's the small one and there's a bigger one. And the bigger one is owned by Russia. We have the smaller one, I think. Doesn't matter which way it is. But they are both considered. One is considered part of Alaskan American soil, the other is considered Russian soil. They're 2.5 miles apart. We are 2.5 miles from Russia at our closest point. This is where Donald Trump doesn't know anything, but he talks like he knows everything. Donald Trump is a raging narcissist and an idiot, and those are bad combinations to be put together. All right, so that's going to do it for the Analytical Iowan podcast for today. I'm going to be back tomorrow with even more to talk about because there's always stuff to talk about. We're starting another week, and we will have to see what Congress does with any of the issues going on and seeing if they start to hold anybody in this administration accountable for anything they've done. So I want to thank you for taking the time to join me. I hope you have a great day, and we will be back tomorrow.
That was Eric. That does it for our analysis today. If you appreciated us cutting through the noise to get to the critical context, please make sure you're subscribed to the Analytical Iowan podcast on Spotify and YouTube. We'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.